So for this talk, Daniel invented two of his colleagues. And apart from the talk he held 9 years ago on Rowhammer, he also won multiple Pony Awards. That is an information security award. And in which category did he win? In the category Best Song. So apparently there's an information security award that honors the best song. And he won it multiple times. And as if that is not enough of science communication, he also recorded an entire sitcom, Side Channel Security, which you can watch on YouTube. But of course, we're not here to talk about any of that. Let's instead hear about the prevalence of Rowhammer 10 years later by Daniel Gruß, Florian Adamski, and Martin Heckel. The stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. 10 years, so I was here 2015. 10 years ago, 2014, that's when the first Rowhammer paper came out. 10 years already, and it's still an issue, right?
Is it really?
Well, what is this Rowhammer thing anyway?
Yeah, maybe to talk about Rowhammer, we first have to go back to the basics, to the origins, and talk about the root cause. And the root cause is in DRAM. You know DRAM, right?
Sure, that's the thing with the DIMMs you plug into your computers.
And it's not just DIMMs, you also have multiple DIMMs. They are operated in channels. And then if you look at a single DIMM, then it has two sides. That's the ranks. Yeah. And if you take a look at the single rank, then you also can take a look at a chip.
So one of those chips holds one of the banks everybody tells about.
Well, you actually have multiple banks on these chips. And on these chips, it looks a little bit like an Excel sheet. So you have these specific RAWs where you can save your data. And there's where the name actually comes from, so Rowhammer.
All right, but there's also the thing that the operating system has to put the data into the memory, right? The system has to put the data in the memory, and then multiple pages from the operating system level go into the same DRAM row, because the DRAM row is 8 kilobytes, and a page on the operating system level is only 4 kilobytes. So it can look like this, for instance. This for an older architecture, 2013, 2014, Sandy Bridge. There it looked pretty much like this. On modern microarchitectures, it can look a lot more complicated.
This Rowhammer, the row buffer here at the end of the slide becomes quite important in a while. Because we have a couple of problems with DRAM. So first of all, the DRAM chip contains multiple capacitors, and these capacitors save the actual data. So voltage is on it, then you have a 1, and if there's no voltage, then this is a 0. The problem is, if you pay attention to physics class, this capacitor loses its voltage over time, and that's a problem. And this is why we need to refresh that regularly, and that's called the refresh rate. And usually we have a refresh rate about 64 milliseconds. And we have a second problem. If you read from one of the raw, you're actually destroying the data because you are setting voltage on. And for that, the row buffer becomes important, because you will copy the data from the raw to the row buffer, and there you will have the actual data. Yeah.
But it also means whenever you read data, it's not just destroyed in there, but also when you say you want to read something else, it's written back into the actual row. So just reading, constantly destroys the data and writes it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we take a look at how this works with the row buffer, we can look at it like this. The data is first up there, then it's copied down to the row buffer. Yeah. And then it's written back. That's how it works. Let's maybe take a look at the timeline for this. Then we can give Martin a good overview of how this worked historically, right?
So there's at least some literature from 1971, and that was one of the first DRAM IC, the Intel 1103. And in the literature, you can find that this IC was pattern sensitive, which means that could already mean that that could be vulnerable to Rowhammer attacks at that time. But it took quite a while, from 2012, and several, the industry that creates DRAM chips issued several patents, and there's the name Rowhammer event integrated. And this Rowhammer event is a disturbance error.
Yeah, but if it's a disturbance error, we all know if there's a reliability problem, then there is also a security problem. Yeah. And then the question, of course, is how does Rowhammer work, right? That's what you want to know.
Yes, please.
Okay, let's see. The idea basically is that you just access memory locations at a very, very high frequency, maybe 1 million times, maybe 500,000 times, and you do this in a very short amount of time. And then what you hopefully see, as an attacker, of course, but we are just putting on the attacker hat here, that you see some bit flips in an adjacent row, right, next to the rows that you accessed, because the Rowhammer effect drains some additional charge from these adjacent cells in the adjacent rows. Yeah, and this can then be exploited because if you induce random bit flips in memory which doesn't even belong to your process, to your security domain, then you can exploit this.
How can I exploit this?
We will come to that in a second. So let's take a look at a practical example. So here you can see on the right side, you can see the assembler instructions that can actually exploit that, Rowhammer. You can see we have 3 rows here. And the first thing that we are doing, we are just reading memory from our own memory here. So we are moving data from that row to the row buffer, and we are actually reading that data then from the row buffer. And the second instruction that you can see here, which means we, since we are sharing a single row buffer, we need to write that data back, and then we are moving to the next line. So we are reading again, and we need to put that data again to the row buffer, and we are reading that. And and then we need to flush any cache that maybe has cached our data, because we would like to do that step over and over again and not reading any data here. From the cache. So if we do that multiple times, there might be a chance that we are lucky and we can dance and we can say we can touch the line in between.
Yeah, there are multiple hammering techniques. The ones that were first described in the 2014 paper and then also by Julian and Seaborn from Google in 2015 were single-sided hammering and double-sided hammering. Single-sided hammering just takes random locations, a bunch of them, and hopes that some of them go to the same DRAM bank, and then you have this effect that multiple rows are opened and closed alternatingly. With double-sided hammering, they described a technique which is more targeted and closer to the 2014 paper, where you really specifically hammer 2 memory locations, very specifically 2 memory locations that sandwich another row in which you want to induce bit flips. But the bit flips might also occur above or below those rows that you hammer. Later on, more techniques came up, right? We also described the technique called one-location hammering, where you just hammer random locations, a single random location in your memory, and then you see bit flips next to that one. But there are several more many-sided hammering. A lot of hammering techniques have been presented over the years.
Okay, but basically when I take a look at the assembly code we saw before, then we need virtual addresses. How do I select virtual addresses that belong to one of these patterns?
Let's maybe take a brief look at that. So a virtual address like this one, good virtual address, hopefully that is valid. This translates to a physical address in some way, and then in some way to the DRAM, right?
Okay, so now I have not 1 black box transitions, but 2 black box mappings that I don't understand. Great.
Yeah. I mean, For some of the techniques, you don't need this, right? Because you just take random locations. That's fine. You still have a good chance to hammer the right locations. And for other techniques, you can use, for instance, 2 megabyte pages or 1 gigabyte pages, and then you have more information about the physical address, because they share these bits in the address. Or you could just ask the operating system. Older Linux versions, for instance, you could just ask the procfs, and it would give you the physical address for your virtual address, right? By now, this is root privileged, and then it gets, then it's not so easy anymore.
Actually, the first mitigation against Rowhammer was that we cannot read the data from PageMat anymore. So,
So what do we do now?
So it's complicated to get from the virtual address to the physical addresses, and when we have the physical address to get to the notation that we have rows and banks and stuff like that, well, reverse engineering to the rescue. So if we have multiple banks on a DRAM chip, and if we taking, let's say, 2 random memory addresses, and if these memory addresses are on the same bank, and we measure the access time sequentially, so first the first one and then second one, and it must be slow if they are on the same bank, because they still share only 1 row buffer, which means they need to put it back and so forth. And if they 2 memory addresses are on different banks, this will be, in comparison, pretty fast, because they have their own row buffer. And then, if we measure the time, that will become quite fast.
But wait a second. If it's slow in the one case and fast in the other case, it's a side channel.
Right.
Right. And that means you can exploit this also to just leak information or to reverse engineer these addresses.
Okay, so now we have a side channel, but can this exploit it somewhere else?
Well, now if we reverse engineered the addresses and we also have in some form physical address information, we can induce bit flips, for instance, in page tables. That's what Dulian and Sibon also did in 2015. They presented a technique where they induce bit flips in page table entries, specifically in the physical page number or the page frame number. And if they flip a bit in there, then the mapping changes. The translation from virtual to physical changes. And if you're lucky, then afterwards it's not just pointing to one other page of your process, but maybe to a kernel page, or even better, to one of your own page tables, so you can modify your own memory mappings.
But come on, what's the probability to randomly flip a bit in memory and hit exactly 1 page table entry at the right location? That's incredibly improbable.
True. But you can increase this chance by spraying page tables over the entire memory. I just run this for loop on your computer where I mmap the same file over and over again, and then you need a lot of page table entries, but the file is only once in memory, so it doesn't occupy a lot of space. And then I have a very high chance that any physical page number that I flip to, that this will be a page table entry, because I filled the entire thing with page table entries. And the probability that I hit a page table entry is also very high, because it's filled all with page table entries. Yeah. So I basically just need to run this code, and this is what Sibon and Dulian did, and then, with this you can exploit Rowhammer.
But wait a minute, I mean, this seems to be very unrealistic. I mean, because that means I need an account, or you need an account on my machine. I mean, sorry, but who would give Daniel an account on their machine? I mean,
I
sorry.
for sure wouldn't do this.
Okay, but who would access a website, maybe? What if a website could do this? This is what we showed 9 years ago here at the Congress in this room. Rowhammer.js, where we did this attack from JavaScript. This is a screenshot from back then, bit flips right from the HTML page. We did double-sided hammering, and we didn't need the flush instruction anymore, just via JavaScript, just memory accesses. This was a talk that I gave there with Clementine Maurice, and basically what we then concluded was Rowhammer.js, it's root privileges for web apps, right? And we all know what happened afterwards, like billions of computers taken down. Horrible, right?
Well, that's fake news.
But then what did actually happen?
Yeah.
Still nothing.
Well, it's not nothing, right? It's not nothing. If you take a look at the papers that have been published on the topic, actually you can see there's like 500 plus papers published on the topic by now per year. So it's a really important topic, as you can see.
And also mitigation papers. So
also mitigation papers, not just attacks, right? Too many works to discuss, actually, right? We could start with the 500 from this year, but we wouldn't finish in this time.
But that's all academic papers, so looks like an academic problem. Academics sitting in their ivory tower and writing papers about some theoretical effects that nobody has ever seen in practice.
Yeah. So why does Rowhammer even matter? I think there's a very simple argument here. And the first is reliability.
Yeah, sure. I mean, nobody wants that their system just crashes, right?
Yes. The other is security, right? You don't want to be vulnerable. Even if the chance is low, you don't want to be vulnerable to this attack, right? And both of these are possible. So let's maybe talk about the security part a bit more to convince you that this is really relevant. Attacks, attacks, attacks. That's the most important part. With Rowhammer, we already showed that we can do privilege escalation attacks and we can bypass all memory isolation barriers in the system. I would say that is much worse than the meltdown attack, and that was big in the media.
Yes, I remember this one.
Well, the problem is we have a couple of challenges to overcome. So first of all, we need high-resolution timers. If you have seen before the measurement where we conduct the side channel and the reverse engineering, we need high-resolution timer.
But we did this from JavaScript as well, right? Yeah.
Well, we don't have these high-resolution timer anymore. But yeah, also we need, the problem is that it becomes pretty difficult to conduct these attacks on different systems because all the systems are a little bit different.
But let's just assume we solve all of these problems. We still have to somehow get the correct amount of bit flips in the correct locations, which I think is pretty hard.
But there are several papers looked at that, and usually they all say bit flips are reproducible. So if you find a bit flip in one location and you hammer the same locations again, you will get the same bit flip again. So that's great for attacks. You just template, find the right bit flip, hammer again, bam, you're in. Easy, right? And you can even do more than that, right? Not just for attacks, you can even use it in a positive way for identification or authentication with a physical unclonable function. No one can forge your DRAM, right?
I remember they did a paper about fingerprinting as well.
Yes. So out of many systems, out of many, many systems, they can single out that this is one specific system, right?
They showed it on 8 systems.
Yeah.
That's not that much.
It's enough to compute an average, right? Okay, so.
Well, and now the typical cat and mouse game, as we have seen it in security, starts all over again. So one of the early mitigations to mitigate Rowhammer was just to increase the refresh rate that we have talked about earlier. As you remember, we have the usual refresh rate of 64 milliseconds, and this can be increased by 2 or 3 times. So that's what the BIOS companies actually did.
But come on, there's a reason why they selected 64 milliseconds. So of course you can tweak this parameter, but then you need more power and your performance decreases. So that's maybe not that good idea.
And you can still attack it. There was a paper that showed that you can still attack it even with doubled refresh rate. We also published further research in this direction and showed that if you flip opcodes, you can also change the meaning of what is going on in the code. For instance, the right bit flip completely inverts the logic in the pseudo-binary. We looked at the pseudo-binary, 29 exploitable bit flips in there, and all of them bypass the password check.
But ECC memory to the rescue. So ECC is error correcting code. So ECC memory actually stores a parity bit to each row, and which means we can detect bit flips and fix it, right?
But it also can be bypassed. There was a paper showing exactly that from WUSEC, and they reverse engineered first how ECC works, and then with multiple bit flips in the right location, they can induce bit flips there as well. Exploitable bit flips.
Okay, but the industry is not sleeping, sorry. So they come up with a new mitigation strategy, and this is called target row refresh. So that works, we have a sampler and we have an inhabitator. So the sampler is looking at how many activations you have on specific rows, and if it sees that it bypasses a specific threshold, it alarms the inhabitator, and then it can refresh that specific row.
Right. But the implementation of these is very specific to the...
Well, it's proprietary, which means it needs to be it's secure, right?
But isn't this, that security by obscurity? They told me we shouldn't do this.
And also, it has been bypassed. There was a trespass paper, again from WUSEC, and they showed that if you align the accesses with the refreshes of the memory controller, then you can still, with some dummy accesses in between, still confuse this mechanism enough that you can induce bit flips and flip the victim bit that you want to flip. Right? Yeah. We also showed later on with the half-double attack, there was a collaboration with Google that we can also hammer rows further away. And actually now the mechanism that you just suggested to refresh the rows actually does the part of the hammering, because it's doing these accesses to refresh rows, but it's actually hammering now.
So the mitigation just enables another attack.
Yeah, there were more papers. Blacksmith also 2022, they presented a fuzzer which looks at different parameters, different characteristics of Rowhammer patterns and finds patterns that work on these systems. So they looked at a bunch of systems and they found bit flips on 100% of the DIMMs that they looked at.
So 100% of all DIMMs are affected?
Yes, 100% of your computers are affected.
Wait. 100% of what? I mean, they only tested a few DIMMs, so 100% of the tested DIMMs, right? And they had a specific configuration, specific setup, and also they used the older TRR. So how realistic is that?
Right. But it has to generalize, right? And you all are using laptops with DDR4, so your laptops will all be affected, right? Or maybe DDR5.
But what about DDR5? I thought DDR5 is secure.
Yes, it's secure now, sorry. So we have a new mitigation strategy called PRAC. And PRAC works like that it fixes the problems from TRR. So first we have an activation counter for each row. And in TRR it was like that you just have a couple of counters here. And second, we guarantee that every victim row gets refreshed in a specific time frame, and that was also not the case for TRR. So now we are really safe.
So, but all of the previous attacks were only working on Intel CPUs. So does this mean when I have an AMD CPU, I don't have this problem?
Well, yeah, let's talk about DDR5, right?
DDR5? I mean, you're talking about AMD and DDR5, and you're saying, oh, if you're using AMD or DDR5, you're not affected. That's also not true anymore, because there was a recent Zenhammer paper, and they showed that bit flips are not only possible on AMD CPUs, but also with DDR5. It's just different DRAM mappings. You need to align things a bit better and adjust the strategies a bit, and then you have bit flips on DDR5. So all of your DDR5 systems, you are affected as well.
Well. How many systems they have tested? I mean, 10. And out of these 10, only on one DIMM they found a couple of bit flips. Doesn't sound realistic to me, sorry.
I would still say Rowhammer is really dangerous. If you're using DDR5, it's really dangerous, right? Yeah. The question is, how can we continue there?
Yeah, I think we need to do we use the scientific method and let's do a survey, a comprehensive review, and analyze the papers and see if that is really a problem, right?
That's a great idea. When are we going to see this paper from you?
I don't have so much time. What about you, Daniel? I mean, you have a lot of free time, right?
I'm in so many committees, I don't have any time for that. Martin,
Right,
you're
I
a
have to do
PhD student. You have time for this, right?
Okay, so yes, let's say I prepared something, and you can read it for yourself.
Yeah. Can you maybe give us a summary of what you found?
I can at least try. So basically, the sample size of the different papers is very low. So the sample size has a median of 4. Most papers have a sample size of 1.
Okay, that's not that much, but at least it's easy to compute an average.
Sure.
Yeah. What else can you tell us about these systems?
When we take a look at the papers, we also see that the majority of the papers analyze DDR3 and DDR4. Little papers analyze something else, and also when we take a look at the systems they used, it's basically all lab systems or even some kind of FPGA. So basically they built their own memory controller and then verified that there are bit flips on DIMMs.
So I put my philosopher hat on, so does this really matter?
Well, it kind of does matter, doesn't it? We had the points before. Reliability, security, it's relevant.
Sure, but what's the prevalence of all of this?
Well, we still don't know.
Yeah. What we know about Rowhammer is that if your system is affected, then it's a problem, right? And we know that over the past 10 years, academia managed to test almost 400 DIMMs. That's a lot, right? 400 DIMMs. And then we found that 80% are affected. So 80% of your systems will be affected.
So 400 DIMMs, that's something like 5% of DIMMs in this room?
Yeah, academia managed to test 40 DIMMs a year. That's good, right? Yes.
And it's still not 100%, sorry.
But 400 DIMMs.
It's not that much.
If we compare this with the DIMMs in this room, probably that's just 10% of the DIMMs that are in this room right now. So if you would run a Rowhammer test, all of you, we would have a sample size that would be 10 times as large as the current entirety of the state-of-the-art on Rowhammer. So, yeah, what do we need? We need to figure out who is right.
Yes, that's a good approach.
Is it relevant? I would say yes. He would say no. That's why we're here.
Right. No attacks in the real world, so the prevalence is actually unknown. So, again, we are researchers, so let's do research. Yeah.
Well, Martin, could you maybe do a study?
We can try to do a study, sure. So we've also already prepared something.
Yeah, because if we want to do research, I'm not the person who would say, oh, we need a logo first and a website and so on, but...
You actually are.
So we have a logo.
We also have a website.
And maybe at this point, we would also like to ask you just briefly, who would in general not exclude the possibility of participating in such a study? All right, all these hands, that's great. We prepared something, and we will explain this to you in a second. So let's talk first about the goals of our study. The goals are that we figure out what are the real-world conditions on real systems. Does Rowhammer really work on real systems?
So we need a large-scale prevalence observation, so we need to really figure out which systems are affected. Are there some specific exploits that work better on this system or on that system?
Yes, but we can't do that on our own because we've seen academia cannot, even if we would buy 10,000 systems, we couldn't get the diverse environment that we have with real users. Yeah, but how do we get those people to test Rowhammer on their systems?
I think we need some kind of test system.
Yeah. Can you prepare something there?
Right, well, I have to prepare again. All the time I have to prepare something.
We're busy, sorry.
Great. So yes, we prepared a Linux bundled with a set of tools which can test and identify DRAM addressing functions, which can also execute some Rowhammer tests on the system. But we don't actually execute any attacks or exploits, so we just measure if bits flip and monitor this.
Right. So yeah, we wouldn't have any advantage of testing the exploit chain on a real system because that's not interesting. The interesting part is testing whether the Rowhammer effect even works because that tells us something about the prevalence. Yeah, the question is, how can people participate? Yeah, hundreds of thousands of participants. How do we find these people?
Well, I think let's do a talk at the Congress, right?
Okay, we give a talk at the Congress. And then what do we do there?
We hand out USB sticks and a couple of thousands of them. Why not?
So we actually have two people here helping us, two of our students. If you want to take a USB stick from us, you can, but we brought 2,000 of those. 2,000 of them.
We are optimists, sorry.
Yes, but what if they don't want to take the USB stick?
It's also possible to download the ISO image from our project website and participate. And in detail, to participate, you basically just flash the image to a USB stick or take one of them, re-give out, boot your system with it, and then basically you can do this while you are sleeping or while you are at work or whatever. And then you can upload the results and thereby contribute to our study. You can also use it to just test your system if you don't want to upload the results back to us.
All right, yeah. If you don't get a USB stick right now, you can later on find us in Hall 3 at the palm tree. We are then distributing the rest of the USB sticks there. But otherwise, there are people running around and just grab a USB stick from them. Yeah. In the end, of course, we want to get the results. You can, of course, just run the tests and figure things out on your own. But we would like to get the results for the study. And then you have to upload this. You can either do this through the booted image or upload the file separately later on. Yeah. Yeah, let's maybe talk a bit more about trust.
But, I mean, Martin, what about if they really don't trust us? I mean, is there anything we can do?
First, everything is open source, so you can visit our website, visit the GitHub repository we linked there. You can build the ISO image your own from source code. You can run a Docker image. However, we would prefer if you would run the ISO image because then you have the exact kernel reuse and basically it's all the same software versions and so on.
Yeah, maybe some more ideas. If they get the USB stick from us, then this should be fine, right? You know who we are. This is also a DFG FWF research project. If we would spread malware, we would run into bigger problems, right? So
I mean, it makes sense that you do backups, that you disconnect your disk and peripherals. I mean, if you feel it, you can do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you say you still have concerns, don't participate, right? Don't feel forced to participate. This is an important research question that we want to answer, but if you feel like, I don't trust these guys, I don't want to plug in a USB stick from a hacker conference, then don't do that. Otherwise, if you feel like, okay, we can do that, then just take the USB stick if you like, or build the image on your own. Why should you participate?
I mean, academic cannot answer this alone. We need a big community like here to help us. So we need you.
Yeah. Also other perks, if you want to.
Yes, you can firstly keep the USB stick if you take it with you. You can also get one of the nice Flippy RAM t-shirts we are wearing right now when you perform or when you test 10 systems and send us the tokens you get for testing those. However, there's limited stock on these. You can also get a gift card. It's all described on the website as well. You can get your name in the acknowledgements of our study paper when we publish it.
If you want to. Yeah, and of course, learn if your hardware is affected. Even that might be just interesting.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, let's get to the conclusion and also the call to action. Rowhammer is a reliability issue and it is exploitable if your system is affected.
So real-world prevalence is still unclear, and we would like to figure that out.
Please join us and contribute to our large-scale study. Just visit our website at flippyr.am.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for refreshing my memory on Rowhammer. We have a few minutes left for questions, so let's not waste any time and start with microphone number 4.
Hello. I have a question on how many systems have you actually tried and verified that this will work in? Because, for example, one thing that I saw is that a lot of these papers, they just run the experiment on a system that has one DIMM because, for example, the addressing functions on many systems are like completely undocumented, like we don't know how they work. And I tried to download some tool like from a recent paper, run it on my system, only to find out that it only works on specific CPU, specific kind of machine. So how many systems does it actually work on?
Basically, we try to automate the reverse engineering process of the addressing functions. We automatically adjust the tools in a way they have to be adjusted to run. And we tested it on our systems. It worked there. We hope it works on more systems as well. So our idea is to just automate the entire process so you boot the image and everything just works in an ideal case.
Even if we don't have the right hammering functions, we will still get valuable data for the study because we learn whether we can reverse engineer the DRAM addressing function. That is the precursor for a Rowhammer attack.
Thank you.
There is also a question from the internet.
Not all the ECC DIMMs are the same. There are registered versus unregistered, for example. Is there a difference between them in terms of exploitability?
There has been there have been papers on ECC RAM, but working on ECC RAM is, first of all, more expensive because you need very expensive systems to operate the ECC memory, and also a lot more effort because in many cases you don't directly get a signal because you get, first of all, you get the errors corrected. So you would already have to know enough to induce multiple errors at once that you see an effect, or physically attach something to the system to observe these errors. So I would say there's much less research on that, so we don't know, because it's more complicated to do research on those.
Next up is microphone number 1.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I actually have 2 questions. My first question will be, is there a difference in the amount of bit flips that you get depending on your BIOS vendor or on your operating system?
Basically, it's hard to talk about the operating system because the proof of concepts, at least we are using, are all running on Linux and also use the Linux interfaces, so we've not tried to port them to other operating systems. Regarding to the BIOS, for example, the mitigation with the double refresh rate was actually a BIOS configuration. So depending on the version of the BIOS you either had this mitigation or didn't have this mitigation.
Okay, thanks. And the other one, why do you think there's no attempts to exploit this in the wild, or are there maybe actually attempts and we're just not seeing them?
Very good question. So first of all, if there would be exploits in the wild, we might not be the first to know because we are not sitting in the right organizations.
Also, I think they are easy to spot. I mean, if you see the assembler code, I mean, you can easily scan something like that and see if you need high precision timers like that. So I think if you analyze the binary, it would be pretty easy to spot it like that. So, yeah.
And then again, we don't know about the prevalence. So even if you would try to attack a system with that, why wouldn't you go for some approach that has a higher chance of working?
All right,
and phishing is still easier, right?
Microphone number 2, please.
Hi. Do you know about any research done against systems that do memory encryption in hardware?
I don't think I think I've not seen anything in that direction, but the question is always how this works. If you're using, it depends on the mode how the cipher is used, and therefore DRAM you typically want to use a mode that you can easily only update a specific location in DRAM, and if that means that there is no movement of bit information in this data block, then a bit flip would still be a bit flip, right? So it depends on how the cipher is operated.
We have time for one more question, and that one is presented by our signal angel.
Are JavaScript Rowhammer attacks, even only proof of concept attacks, still possible today? And how long does it take to induce a bit flip from visiting a web page?
Yeah, so sample size 1 is a problem, I guess. Easy to compute an average. We had one system where Rowhammer.js worked with default configuration in JavaScript. We had a lot more systems where it worked. I think by now we might have a second where it works from JavaScript. But that's basically it.
I guess the Smash paper, right? They also conducted
Right, that was another paper that showed that. But for the other systems, very often they are not operated in default configuration. It's also a question of what the goal of the research is. If the goal is to show that this is an exploit path that could work if the system is vulnerable to this, then this is, of course, interesting research. But it doesn't answer the question about prevalence. And that's exactly the situation that we're in. We don't know enough about the prevalence of this.
And I also think the high precision timers are not available anymore. I guess that could be a problem at least. Yeah.
That's true, but then there are many papers that bypass this as well. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to disappoint you, but I have to close the Q&A now because, as always, we are tight on schedule. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to one of our 3 speakers. And one more time, show some appreciation for their talk.